Okay, so welcome to your last section of Chapter 3, which means you have a Chapter 3 test in your near future. But to finish off with Chapter 3, we've been solving equations, we've been solving inequalities, and now we're going to learn how, if we have a fraction, and we don't like to work with fractions, how could we get rid of that fraction to help us solve the equation or the inequality? So we're going to transform an equation or an inequality with fractions into an equivalent equation or inequality without fractions. So, always keep in mind, whatever we multiply the left side, we must also do to the right side. And truly, anything we do to the left, we must do to the right, but I focus on multiplying, and you'll see why here in a quick minute. So we know fractions, typically we get kind of afraid of, and we're kind of scared of them, so they can get messy. So that's one reason we don't necessarily like them. So if we can get rid of them, we want to. And we're going to do this by what is called clearing the fractions. So to clear the fractions, we want to multiply the equation or inequality, so the left and the right side, by a common multiple. So a common multiple is a number that both numbers go into, a common multiple of the denominator, or of the denominators. And then if we want to work with smaller numbers, we want to come up with that least common multiple. So I know that you've heard of least common denominators. It's the exact same thing. So a common multiple, least common denominator, they are the same. This is what's going to allow us to clear fractions, and we're only going to be working with integers as coefficients. So remember, integers, no fractions, no decimals. So think of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then their opposites, -1, -2, -3. So integers, no fractions, which means no decimals. Okay, so to start off with, we have m over 6 minus 3 over 8m is less than or equal to 5. So m over 6 minus 3/8 m is less than or equal to 5. So we have fractions. Well, let's work with, yes, we have like terms, so we could simplify, but let's first try to get rid of those fractions so we don't have to worry about trying to get a common denominator and then grouping everything together. So what we want to do is think of, because 6 and 8, they're both my denominators, what's the first number that both 6 and 8 go into? Well, that is going to be 24. So I can multiply the entire left side by 24, and remember that is 24 over 1, and then the right side by 24. So I'm not changing anything, I'm not changing the value of anything, because whatever I'm doing to the left, I'm doing to the right, so I'm still keeping everything as is. So 24 was the first number that both 6 and 8 go into. So then it's just a matter of the distributive property. So remember, multiplying fractions, we multiply straight across. So I end up with 24m over 1 times 6 minus 24 times 3 over 1 times 8m is less than or equal to 5 times 24, which is 120. Okay, well, we can simplify this. 24 over 6 is just 4. 72 over 8 is 9. Now, how easy is it to just go ahead and group and simplify everything? So 4 minus 9, these are my like terms. I have -5m is less than or equal to 120. Now what do? Divide both sides by -5. So what do we have to keep in mind? What do we have to make sure we do? Flip that sign. We're multiplying by a negative. So m is greater than or equal to -24. So that is the solution there. So m is greater than or equal to -24. So let's say we didn't know that first number that both 6 and 8 went into. A lot of you have thought, or have done in the past, you can multiply those denominators together and figure out what's a common denominator between 6 and 8. If we do that, I'll just come off to the side here. If I have m over 6 and 3/8 to get a common denominator, 6 times 8 is 48. So I could technically say, hey, I want to take this side and multiply it by 8 over 8, and this side and multiply it by 6 over 6. So that way, 48 would be my common denominator in both cases. So if you're ever unsure, just multiply those numbers together, and you'll know you'll have a common denominator. Now, it might not be the least common denominator, and that's okay. I just like to work with the least common denominator, also known as the least common multiple, simply because it keeps our numbers smaller and keeps us from having to reduce later on. All right, let's look at the next one. x over 7 minus 2 is greater than 1/2. So if you notice, we have our fraction x over 7 and 1/2. So 7 and 2 are the denominators. So what's the first number that both 7 and 2 go into? 14. And again, if you're unsure, we can take 7 times 2. It just so happens that 7 times 2 is 14, and that is my least common denominator, or multiple anyway. So the left side, I can multiply by 14. Remember, it's 14 over 1. So I multiply the right side by 14. 14 over 1. And now it's the distributive property. Remember, there's a little 1 in front of this x. If you need that there, that's fine, write it in. So multiplying straight across, 14 times 1. So I get 14x over 1 times 7. Minus, remember this guy, if I want to write 2 as a fraction, or negative 2 as a fraction, just write it over 1. So 14 times negative 2 is negative 28 over 1, 1 times 1, is greater than 1 times 14 over 2 times 1. So now can I reduce any of these fractions? Can I simplify? Well, we know 14 divided by 7 is 2x. 28 over 1 is just 28. Is greater than 14 divided by 2, which is 7. So now, I just solved this problem. So I'm going to add 28 to both sides. So I get 2x is greater than 35. We need this coefficient to be a 1, so I can divide by itself, which is the same as multiplying by its reciprocal. So x is greater than 35 halves, or 35 over 2. Some of you may want to write that because 35 over 2 cannot be reduced if I write it as an improper fraction. If you want to write it as 17 and a half, that's fine as well. They're both, it's the same number. So however you want to write it. So again, 7 and 2 are the denominators, so I cleared my fractions by finding the common denominator of 14. Notice I have integer coefficients, 2, 28, and in this case my constant is just a 7. So my coefficients, the number in front, or all the numbers I'm working with now, are integers. 5 equals negative 1/3 plus 3/7 y. So I've got two fractions here. Notice the denominators, that's all I care about, 3 and 7. So I want to clear the fractions. I want to get rid of the fractions and work with only integers. So what is the first number that both 3 and 7 go into? It's 21. Just so happens again, if I take 3 times 7, I get 21. And it just so happens that is the first number that both 3 and 7 go into. So because that is my least common multiple, least common denominator, or really just in fact a common denominator, common multiple, I can multiply the right side by 21. Remember that is 21 over 1. And then, since I did it on the last side, I have to do it on this side as well. So, 21 times 5, and we get 105, equals, we distribute through, negative 1 times 21, negative 21 over 3, plus 21 times 3 is 63 over 7, and y, okay, so now can I go ahead and simplify? So I still have 105 equals negative 21 over 3 is negative 7. 63 divided by 7 is 9. So now we have nice numbers to work with. We have those integers. So I can go ahead and add 7 to both sides. So I get 112 equals 9y. How do I get y by itself? How do I make this a 1? Multiply by 1/9, which is the same as dividing by 9. And we get y equals 112 over 9. And yes, you could think of the common denominator, group everything together. So this is just one way to do it, to solve these equations or inequalities, and try to make it a little bit easier on us. Not the only way, it's just a method that maybe we want to use in the future to help solve problems a little bit quicker. Last one I'm going to look at. This one has decimals, and think about decimals again, and think about the place value of those decimals. So, if you notice, we have the distributive property, so let's go ahead and do that. So 0.02 times 5, I believe should be 0.1. So 0.1h minus 0.02 times 28 minus 0.56 equals 9.8. Okay. So yes, we could go ahead, we could add 0.56 and then divide by 0.1, but if we ever want to clear decimals, if you think about it, this is the tenths, this is the hundredths. So what's the least common multiple between 10 and 100? It's going to be 100. Or if you think of, hey, I need to move this decimal 2 spaces to the right, which is the same thing as multiplying by 100, I'm going to clear everything out. So really what we want to do is go ahead and multiply by 100. So 100 times 0.1, or if you think of moving the decimal 2 spaces to the right, 1, 2, this is going to be 10h, minus 0.56 times 100, or 1, 2, equals, and in fact, maybe I should separate this out, because whatever we do to the left, we're doing to the right. So yes, I'm multiplying the entire equation by 100. So 100 times 9.8, or move the decimal 2 spaces to the right, 1, 2, that would be 980. So now we have a nice problem to work with. So we need to add 56 to both sides. So we get 10h equals 1036. Divide both sides by 10, or multiply by 110. And we get h equals 103.6. So that's just a way to look at it with decimals. Yes, you could solve it as is, but maybe we want to work with integers, or you're asked to work with integers at some point. Okay, so go ahead and read section 3.8 and make sure that you do these practice runs for homework, and I will see you tomorrow.